That's interesting, right? And there are other people who have had very credible sightings, and like I said, I don't doubt there's a habitat. So there's a lot of takeaways, and I think, does it create like a clear yes or no answer if someone were to ask me, do you believe there are mountain lions in the Northeast? No, I'd have to give a long drawn out answer because
Yeah.
there's so many nuances. Like the possibilities there, yes. Breeding populations, that's highly debatable, and not very likely in my view. And when you mention the point about the government conspiracy in terms of because of the hoaxes, do people is that why they're so cautious? I talked to game wardens in Vermont. I
Yep.
interviewed the
I remember that.
the fur bearer biologist for New Hampshire. He's actually been seen on the show Northwoods Law. I've seen him on there a couple times when they've
Nice.
had like a moose that's gotten stuck somewhere. Kind of funny, but I talked to people that were formerly in the Massachusetts kind of environmental kind of movement and that sort of thing. People in Connecticut and Rhode Island as well, and that did definitely seem to be the case where a lot of these people, like the guy I interviewed from New Hampshire or the game warden in Vermont, he said, I want to believe people, but we've looked into some of these stories and they turn out to be hoaxes, a lot of them, so they don't even look into a lot of them. And they don't have
The bushwhacks were some of the worst days I've ever had in the mountains, or life, really.
And I tell people all the time, never underestimate the Catskills. You can't underestimate them.
Why the Catskills is such a great place for trout.
It was really the development of New York State. Catskills were responsible.
Now you're listening to Inside the Line, the Catskills.
All right, Alexander, good to see you, buddy. Good to talk to you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, question. I saw this little census that was just reported today. What do you think the most visited park in the United States is? National park?
Oh, I think I know for a fact that it's the Great Smoky Mountains.
Yes, dude. I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I mean, I only know that because I was there last July and I I was there speaking at the Great Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference, and I got to do 2 days solo out there, just backpacking through an area of the Southern Smokies on the North Carolina side. So I drove through from North Carolina, Cherokee, North Carolina to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is like the most famous, I forget the name of the drive, but dude, it was tourist central. I mean, you could not believe how many people were there. And Gatlinburg is like a Vegas style atmosphere. You've got like carnivals and theme parks and aquariums. It's like a big touristy spot. So it's not really what I expected in the middle of the mountains. Like we don't get anything that close up here in New Hampshire. I thought the White Mountains were pretty touristy, but the Smoky Mountains take it a different notch. But that's the main area. Once you get off, I mean, I didn't see anyone that day I went out, and the second day I was coming out, I did not see anyone in the area I was in.
Nice.
Also, it's very humid and gross to be hiking in July in Tennessee. I wouldn't recommend it really.
Yeah. That southern heat is a little bit more than
this northern boy does not do well in it.
Yeah, and then and stuff like that, it makes you appreciate where you are, and you're just like, my God, this is a little bit too touristy for me. And then you're like, wow, the whites actually aren't that bad. Same thing with the Catskills.
Really? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even the Adirondacks, I've only been up there a handful of times, but really makes me appreciate, parts of northern New Hampshire and Maine. That's where I spent a lot of my free time over the years. And, I complained about it being touristy during 2020, when COVID was going on. Everyone was coming up here, but if you could find plenty of places that were off the beaten path. I think that's generally true everywhere. Like I said, even in Tennessee or in North Carolina in the Smokies when I was there, I was able to find a section to hike where I didn't run into anybody, which is exactly what I was looking for.
Nice. Now the Smokies, I've heard the bear interactions are pretty intense there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, what was cool was I stayed at a backcountry camp down there. You have to stay at permitted camps, or you get a permit and you find there's backcountry camps throughout the Smokies. And I don't know if each site has it, but at least the site I was at had a pulley system with like a bear hang. So, I had my own paracord and stuff, so I could just hang it like a dry bag as I usually do because I'm usually in more remote areas. But that was kind of nice. You had a police system you were to pull it up. But I'll tell you, Gatlinburg, the bears there are like deer. I mean, I had one of my friends there for the conference, for the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference. He was showing me pictures in the back of his Motel 6. There's like 3 bears that just live out there, eat the trash, and people feed them. And I'm like,
Wow.
this is horrible. I mean, it's not good for the animals. It's not good for the people, but apparently they have a huge bear problem down in the Smokies. It's like one of the larger concentrations of black bears in the Appalachians. So they're just all over the place. I didn't see any while I was there. I saw elk and other
Ooh,
smaller
nice.
critters. Yeah, there's a couple meadows as you're driving through the Smokies where you have these meadows with elk, and I was stopping to get footage of them, and there's everyone and their mother was stopping too with the cars and everything. It was just like a big tourist pileup all of a sudden. I don't know if they reintroduced those to the area, but I know they formerly were native to that place in Tennessee in the mountains, I think. But I know that they manage the herds now with the elk.
Nice. I didn't know that. I thought, it was just black bears and deer and stuff. I didn't know elk were there. Cool.
It's pretty cool. And it was cool being back. I mean, my first experience with the Smokies was actually when I was in high school doing naturalism and survival training. And we did like a 2.5, 3 week trip to the Smokies where we had to basically create all our own kind of clothing, capotes. We had to make baskets. Basically, instead of like a big hiking pack, you had to make a basket out of, kind of sewing it together and all this stuff. And that was your pack. We hiked it in November and we had snow, I think, for like the first week and a half until we got to lower elevation. So this was a lot different than I remember just because it was completely different season. So that was really my second time experiencing the Smokies. On that first trip, we did a pretty good swath of the AT down there from one point in Tennessee up into North Carolina. So very different, but it's a cool area. Just I don't think I'd go back in July anytime soon.
Off season everywhere.
Yep,
that's what I suggest. So you being from New Hampshire, have you heard about the crazy car break-ins that they've had all the time?
Yes. Yeah, I've been hearing about that lately at trailheads, people getting their cars broken into, if that's what you're referring to.
Yep.
Just it's something I've heard for years. I mean, I hiked the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers back from like 2017 to around 2019. Took me about like 2.5 years to do it. And even then, I mean, and if you go in all the hiking forums or the Facebook groups, people are always like, don't leave your valuables in sight in your car. A lot of people actually just leave their cars unlocked. Mm-hmm. So if somebody really wants to go in there, I mean, I never had an issue with it, but I never really left anything super valuable in my car. I mean, maybe I had like extra, tire repair stuff, just like stuff that I don't know what value it would really have. And we did a lot of things where we would do overnights where we'd leave our car for days at a time in certain parking lots, and we never had an issue. It's not to say, that doesn't happen, but I've heard it's going a lot more lately, which is a bummer. It's just unfortunate because you go to these you think in the city, that's where you're going to fall prey to some of this kind of stuff, right? Like recently I was in New Orleans, and that's considered to be kind of the murder capital of the US right now. And there's a lot of carjackings going on, and I was kind of in and out of the city, but I'm like worried, this is the kind of place that would happen. And then you hear rural, middle of nowhere New Hampshire, you got people breaking into cars, and it's like, it just reminds you that people everywhere kind of suck, which is unfortunate.
People everywhere are assholes.
Yeah, take a little bit of a misanthropic kind of take on the topic. But yeah, it's just a bummer. I wish that wasn't going on, but it just happens everywhere, unfortunately. You're not immune anywhere from the middle of the mountains to downtown big city USA.
Yeah. I thought, I was like, you're from New Hampshire. I thought I'd ask you about that because we don't have that problem yet here in the Catskills, but who knows the assholes coming up here and stuff like that.
It's weird. I mean, New Hampshire is, one of the lowest crime states in the U.S. in general. This whole kind of northern New England, Vermont into Maine, New Hampshire, we really don't have, the murder rate is ridiculously low, all that kind of stuff in general. So it's just sad that kind of stuff goes on because that's petty crime. I mean, a lot of people kind of disregard that, but it's still you got people coming in from out of state. I know we get a lot of people from Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, even New York that come up to hike the Whites, and they get that kind of thing happening, and it kind of will color maybe their view of the place a little bit negatively, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I don't find it negative and stuff like that. I'll still go up there just just a hike. I've been up there once, but I plan on going there in June, I think, for a hike of the presidential range. So we're gonna
Oh,
do that.
dude,
The Preties.
you're gonna love that. Presidential range is something out of this world. Definitely would recommend. I'm sure, you being a hiker, you understand the right preparation. Make sure you got more
Of
stuff
course.
than you think you need, clothing. Presidential range is especially, excuse me, the weather changes up there on a dime. Gets pretty crazy. Some of the worst weather on earth recorded on Mount Washington, the presidential range. I've been up there before hiking at Mount Eisenhower, one of my first 48 4,000 footers that I can remember. It's kind of on the lower end of the Prezzies there, and it's called Mount Eisenhower. I think it used to be Mount Clinton, but it wasn't after President Clinton. It was like a different Clinton. Then they renamed it Eisenhower to go with the rest of the presidents there. But we were going up there, and it was beautiful as we were headed up. And then once you get to the summit, it's like a beautiful May or June day. It's like 70 degrees in the parking lot, beautiful sunny. You get to the summit, and it's like 35, 40-degree weather, rain, wind, and you're freezing your tail off. And
Yeah.
So I started packing extra gear all the time. You learn from your mistakes and all that sort of stuff. But there's been times I've been at summits where I'm bundled up and enjoying my snack after a day of hiking, and somebody who was laughing at me earlier for scoffing at me with the size of the pack I had going up is now ready to book it down the mountain in their short shorts. And you just got to be prepared, because there have been even recently some fatalities in that area, and there's a Franconia Ridge. Actually, my family knew the family whose daughter that passed in the Franconia range. That was just before the New Year. I think that was before the holidays, like November, December. So you hear that kind of stuff, and it's just inexperience is usually the number one cause. And I mean, I don't need to tell you, but I've seen so many things just hiking over the years in the whites that really, I mean, you talk to people and you're like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be trying to do this. Or even the Forest Service would even set up checkpoints at in front of some of the trails to go on Mount Washington, or some of the really long day hikes.
Yeah.
And maybe around from noon to 2 p.m. they would kind of warn people if they felt, if they could kind of profile, and you say, okay, this person looks like they're prepared, they're probably fine, they've got lights, they've got overnight equipment. But I was talking to one of these checkpoints at one point, and I watched their kind of interactions with people, and you'd have a couple come out of their cars, sunglasses, holding a bottle of water, kind of dazed tourist look, and they would approach them and say, hey, what are you guys thinking of doing? And they're like, oh, we're heading up Mount Washington. Like, well, which trail are you going to take? And we're like, oh, that one right there. Well, there's two trails there, and they split off, and one goes to the summit and one goes to the AMC hut. And you could tell they didn't know what they were doing. So that the Forest Service volunteers then offer them an alternative hiking area. They say, well, maybe try this waterfall. It's going to be a less stay hike, because these people didn't even have flashlights. So you see a lot of that stuff. And if you can prevent it, it keeps the search and rescue costs down and that sort of stuff, which there's a lot of those rescues, more than people would probably be comfortable with. In the whites, especially, I think people underestimate the White Mountains because they come from Boston. They think, oh, it's only a couple hours drive up. It's probably fine up there, but the weather can be just so different. And a lot of people have died, unfortunately, because of not being prepared.
Yep. Negligence. Yep. Yeah. I hear it all the time.
I've seen it all. I'm telling you, I've seen some crazy stuff. I've seen people try to argue with me wearing socks and those kind of flip-flop type. It's not like a flip-flop, but it's the one you kind of stick your foot through, hiking up in those. And I'm
Crocs.
like, not Crocs. I mean, I physically have to show you, like something like this.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what you call these things, but
I call them flip-flops. Yeah.
like a
Crocs.
flip-flop. Yeah. So it's just like people, you got to try to at least avoid some kind of tragedy, but you'll hear about them all the time. Rescues every week. I'm sure there's probably, if you were to Google it, there's probably a bunch at a given point, especially as the spring comes in with the thaw. There's still a ton of snow in the higher elevations. I mean, you got snow up in Tuckerman's Ravine up until June. I've been up there sledding and skiing up until almost July.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know I don't know all about New Hampshire, but I read about them all the time. Tuckerman's Ravine holds snow till, like you said, July, August. Sometimes they have avalanches there and stuff that.
Yeah. It's a big bowl essentially. I mean, it's like wild. So people will go up there and they'll fall through, and it can be pretty wild. So the mountains are very rugged, I got to say. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people. I've been all over out west, Alaska, other places, hiked and done a lot of kind of Bigfoot stuff out there. And people think, oh, there's no real mountains east of the Rockies, right? And even the Smokies and down south, I think is such a different environment. They don't get the extremes in the weather. They don't get those alpine zones. I mean, you can be on a 6,000-foot mountain in North Carolina and you're still in the tree line. Whereas in New Hampshire and in the Adirondacks too, you have a alpine zone that starts maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet up in some cases, where you have exposure then that you can, I mean, you can get fried by the sun if it's too hot, or just chilled to the bone and lose your way, as has happened with certain people. So people underestimate the mountains here. And I've talked to a lot of Appalachian trail hikers that say they think New Hampshire was probably the hardest section of the trail, especially because it's towards the end. If they're doing a northbound, it's like right before they get into Maine, which some people say is even harder because there's less resupply places in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, it's pretty rugged. I love it. It's where I kind of learned the ropes about getting out in the woods. So it's always got a special place in my heart.
Good. That's awesome. That's good advice too. Being on search and rescue, I carry shit galore, just for my survival and maybe somebody else's survival. So,
right.
So, you never know. You never know. That's the big thing. So
absolutely.
So once, we're going to be talking about some mountain lions tonight with my favorite topic.
Cool.
Yeah. I wish you kind of knew who I was. I have very doubts of mountain lions, so hopefully you can convince me.
Sure.
But up here near me, like 30 miles north of me, there was a wolf confirmed.
I heard about that actually.
Good. I'm glad
not that
you
long
heard
ago, right?
Dude, this was probably like, not even a month ago.
Yeah, I have a friend actually he's originally from upstate New York, but he lives down in Texas now. And I was just with him in Louisiana. He runs something called the Bigfoot Mapping Project. He takes data from different databases and puts them together. Awesome resource. But he was telling me about that, and I had no idea. I've only heard of one other wolf confirmed case that was from, I think, 2014 in central Massachusetts, of all places. And they think it came down from Canada. So it would have had to have gone through Vermont or New Hampshire along the way down. And I know people who claim to see them, but I mean, if you want to go down the mountain lion rabbit hole, we absolutely can.
We will a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. It's a topic I don't talk about a whole lot anymore. I did a whole project, actually, that poster up there for your sake right there. I have a poster on my wall that's of Lions of the East, which is a documentary I did basically 2018 to 2020. It came out right as COVID started, so that was kind of a bummer, but it was a examination of mountain lion sightings in the New England area and kind of different states, and it took me down a lot of interesting kind of rabbit holes.
Well, good. We'll be talking about that a little bit because I have a bunch of questions about that, and I know my listeners do, and of course the Northeast does. So that'll be good to intertwine that. But yeah, sure. right up for 30 miles from me in Cherry Valley, New York, there was a wolf shooting, and then the DNA was analyzed by the DEC up here, and it was confirmed wolf. So it's really
wow.
It's kind of, we have coyotes galore up here. Coyote population is huge up here,
sure.
But a wolf population is pretty crazy. I know we do have a wolf sanctuary up here. So, I don't know if it could have gotten out there, but I'm pretty sure those fences up there are like 16 feet high. So,
yeah, they're usually probably pretty good at keeping them out. I mean, it just goes to show animals don't recognize our borders, right? I mean, they're just borders that we make arbitrarily between New York State and Pennsylvania or Canada. I mean, there's stories of mountain lions allegedly coming over the Canadian border for quite a long time. There's been confirmed cases up there. And like I was talking about that other wolf there in Massachusetts that probably came from Canada. My guess is that it somehow got in from maybe Quebec, Ontario into New York or one of the New England states and made its way down. So it would be interesting about that one. But yeah.
It definitely, it has my attention because, the coyote population is high. So, I live in the middle. I don't live in the city, but I live in a rural part of the upstate New York. And I hear coyotes all the time. And it's really rare to hear them along a major roadway and stuff like that. So I'm just like, interesting. What about the wolves and stuff like that? Those are awesome predators, beautiful predators.
Yeah, I mean, they used to be in this area, from what I understand, in general in the Northeast, just like mountain lions, same thing. And they were driven out by people that were sheep herders and cattle and all that stuff. They were seen as a nuisance and eliminated. And a lot of the other large species, moose, black bear, everything else moved out as well. And now that parts of New England, which were once completely clear cut, are reforested. And I mean, New Hampshire is the second most forested state in the country after Maine, we're talking, over 85% forested, 90% forested. And a lot of those animals move back to this area. I mean, I live in a rural part of New Hampshire now, and 200 years ago, this was basically pastures and sheep. And now we have habitats that support bear and deer. I literally had deer walking up to my house earlier in the snow. I mean, there's just a ton of food and ton of habitat. And when you get moose, especially in a habitat, that for me is a big sign that, hey, this habitat is conducive enough to support something as large as a moose. That means I think a lot of other species on that chain could easily be there. And then, of course, wolves and mountain lions are the things that didn't officially kind of return. It's harder for some of those big predators like that to kind of bounce back. I mean, bears are a little different, being that they're kind of adaptable omnivores. I mean, they're found everywhere. Black bears basically have one of the widest distributions of any animal in North America. I mean, I've seen them in Florida. Seen tons of sign in Florida. I've seen them pretty much sign of them everywhere. I've seen multiple in Alaska, so they're just absolutely everywhere. So they're different, as I said, the mountain lions and wolves and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I can't wait to talk a little bit about that later on. So it's going to be some good stuff. So good talk, Aleksandar. I love that. I love people who interact with me in the beginning. I really do. Instead of just like, yep.
Yeah, no, for sure. That would be weird. I feel like it would be like a forced conversation.
Exactly. So welcome everyone to episode 67 of Inside the Line, the Catskill Mountains podcast. I had to change the name. We won't talk about that, but thank you to monthly supporters Darren White, Vicky Ferrer, John Comiskey, Jim C., Michael Bongner, David Mead, Matt Smith, and Sharon Klein. Also, thank you, Aleksandar, for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Very popular guy. I don't know how the hell he was just like, yeah, I'll do this guy in the middle of nowhere that's very unpopular and stuff like that. You're a big man, man.
No, I mean, it was funny. I think when you initially had emailed me like a month or two ago, I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I think I just we can push it into March just because I had a lot going on. And I was telling you before we got on the show, I kind of limited to 3 or 4 podcasts a month just because it's like, it becomes like overload. So I'm booking into like May or June at this point. So I appreciate you having me on. Always a pleasure to talk.
It's good to have a celebrity on.
Definitely not. No.
Also, thank you to the Outdoor Chronicles Photography for being a sponsor. So really appreciate it. Molly, I had her on last episode 66. Check it out. She has amazing stuff in adventure elopement and adventure couple photography. Her portfolio is absolutely insane. I was great to talk with her. She is a great positive influence to the mountains and the world and to the photography business. So Molly, thank you for supporting the show. Also, Camp Catskill in Tannersville, best place for Catskills for your hiking gear. They have microspice, snowshoes, shoes and t-shirts, anything you need for hiking. Camp Catskill has. Check them out on Facebook, Instagram. Also, check them out in Tannersville. Really cool. Another thing, my friends over at Trailbound Project are giving away 2 free classes, one for Knots course, another for Shelter course on March 25th. To enter this free contest, send an email to Scott and Joe at info@trailboundproject.com. I'll have that in the show notes about the craziest situation you've had while out in the back country or on the trails. Whether it's close call or a time you've had almost spent like an unexpected night in the woods, give them an email and maybe you'll win a free course. These guys are excellent individuals. They know their stuff. They are from New Jersey Search and Rescue. Their resume is absolutely insane. I cannot believe what they do down in New Jersey, let alone it's pretty crazy. But yeah, check it out. I'll have that in the show notes. Send an email to them for maybe a chance to win at something. So Aleksandar, what are you having to drink tonight, buddy?
So right now I'm having a Von Trapp Brewing Pilsner Bohemian style lager. So basically, if people know the movie The Sound of Music, which is about that Austrian family that escapes from the Austrian Alps to the US, they actually started kind of a resort in Vermont in the mountains, and they have an awesome brewery there. Great, German, Austrian style food. I love like the Wiener Schnitzel and all that kind of stuff. So,
of course,
living in New Hampshire, not that far from Vermont, I'll sometimes see at the liquor stores some of the Von Trapp. So I saw them on sale and I grabbed the case because I love European style lagers and I'm more of a European beer kind of fan. So that's what I'm having tonight. I definitely recommend it. If someone comes across it, you won't regret it if you like that kind of thing.
Nice. I'll tag that in the show notes and stuff like that. Excellent. You're the first that's ever done that. So even especially like a lager from Europe and stuff, not from Europe, but a European made lager, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Wicked. I'm just having a good old Rev Spirits and Coke. Rev Spirits, they do stuff up here in upstate New York. It's made from mead and stuff and honey.
Oh, cool.
It's delicious and it's deadly. Let me tell you that. So, Alexander, you been on any previous hikes? What's your most recent hike?
My most recent hike. So I was down in Louisiana just last week, as of the recording time, so early March here. And we were kind of actually, I mean, I was hiking around in some areas. So I was in an area called the Honey Island Swamp, which is the border basically between Mississippi and Louisiana. And the most of the river's flooded. I mean, this is a swamp I've heard multiple people describe it as the most primitive swamp in Louisiana, which says a lot because there's a lot of these bayous and really kind of prehistoric looking places. But the Honey Island Swamp is a kind of a sliver that goes between the two states. And there's something called the Pearl River that basically feeds the whole swamp. Water was extremely high the whole time, but I managed to find some areas where there was some dry ground. So I actually was originally hoping to hike in and camp along the riverbed in the National Wildlife Refuge. There's the Bogue Chitto National Wildlife Refuge down there, and you're allowed to primitive camp basically within, I think it was like 100 feet of the water's edge or something like that. But given the water level is around 17 feet when I was there, and they close it to camping at 15.5 feet, I couldn't legally camp. So I basically ended up sleeping in my car on like a dirt dead end road in the wildlife refuge. But I managed to find an area there, higher ground. I was hearing coyotes all night, and I was able to hike out and do some exploration and look for tracks. And I was there essentially looking into the story, what's called the Honey Island Swamp Monster, which is a Bigfoot-like creature reported in this swamp for decades, really. And that's kind of the primary reason I was there. So that would have been my most recent hike. I also did do a kayak trip into the Atchafalaya Basin swamp, which is a few hours southwest of there. That's the largest river swamp in North America. And I went in with a buddy of mine, and we kayaked just like a couple miles from a boat launch, basically down one of these bayous, and found a place to camp. And definitely a little out of my element because you've got tons of all the threats there are small. Whereas I'm used to the big stuff, moose, bear, that kind of thing on my neck of the woods, and especially going out west. But down south, everything's small aside from the alligators. You have poisonous cottonmouth snakes, copperheads, all this stuff. So we were hiking around after we had set up camp and came across a cottonmouth. My buddy said, "Hey, stop!" And you just see this white thing in the water, and it's the mouth of it. So that's what you realize. Well, that's why it's called a cottonmouth. Its mouth is open, and then you see the body behind it. You wouldn't see the body before; it's completely camouflaged. But that mouth with the fangs open gives you an idea of what it looks like. And we weren't really close to it. We were maybe 6-7 feet away, so we got to observe it from a very safe distance. They're not aggressive. They don't really chase you. They just don't. They want to be left alone. So we obeyed and got the heck out of there. Yeah, so that would have been my most recent hike, I guess, would have been the Honey Island Swamp, to make a short answer or short question long.
No, that's great. Love hearing different stories about different places. It's great to hear, and it's great to influence people to go around and check out places like Louisiana to hike, let alone,
Yeah, it's a little bit different. Yeah, it puts you out of your element, especially if you're from, more mountainous area.
Yeah. I recently went up. I don't know if you're familiar with the Catskills, but we have Balsam Mountain up here. It's one of the required 3,500 peaks. My friend Mark and I did a recent hike with good snowshoe conditions. It was fantastic for winter. Finally, I mean, New Hampshire, you probably know that this winter has been really seriously messed up. It's just been back and forth.
We just got like 12 inches of snow the other day. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's been, it melts in a matter of days, and all of a sudden we get massive amounts of ice, rain, and then it comes back. This is perfect conditions. We had spikes 3/4 of the way up, and then we hit snowshoes, and it was beautiful snowshoeing conditions. So,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's about down time. And then, I heard this weekend we're supposed to get more snow. So hopefully.
Yep, I heard that too. It's funny because when I was in Louisiana, it was 80-degree weather and like 70% humidity. And then as soon as I get back, we get hit with a giant snowstorm, and it's supposed to be coming back. And I'm like, well, hopefully by April we're starting spring, maybe. I mean, last year we had a beautiful end of March into April, and now I'm really hoping for the best, hoping it ends soon. I'm over it at this point.
Over at least the up and down of like,
yes,
winter, not winter, winter, not winter. It's pathetic.
That's a good point, because I was in Florida back in January, and we were down there looking for what they call a skunk ape. So we were hiking around and doing some Jeep stuff down in the Big Cypress Preserve. Again, beautiful weather. It was really hot and humid down there, which is a little unusual for that time of year. But they had like a heat streak. So, that's when all the snow was coming up here, and then I get home and the weather's beautiful. It's like 50-degree days. And then as soon as I leave for Louisiana, the snow comes back, and then I get back and the snow's here, and it's been all over the place.
Wow. Yeah. It's been one odd winter. Let's just say that. Yeah, it was a great hike with Mark. My friend Mark, I love his company and stuff like that. Of course, Catskill News. Let's volunteer, get those volunteers signing up as soon as possible. I'm guessing New Jersey Trail Conference and Catskill 3500 Club are getting their stuff together for the summer. Volunteer as much as you can. Also, Ryan, my friend from Camp Catskill, the Hunter Branch Rail Trail opening and bridge dedication is April 22nd. So save the date on that. Also, Cave Mountain Music Festival, which is really crazy. Hunter Mountain, everybody's heard of having their music festivals, but Cave Mountain over in Wyndham has Weezer playing, and I forgot the other bands, but Weezer, man, that's like my stuff, my days. Saying it's so, good stuff. I know it sounds horrible, but that was a horrible voice. I might have to edit that out, man.
You gotta leave it in now.
Well, the funny thing is my band used to play that, so I actually love that song. It's my favorite Weezer song.
I remember playing that, I think during they had it in one of the rock bands or Guitar Heroes, 10 or so years ago. Definitely remember. It's
a headbanging song. It's perfect.
I know, it's like you wouldn't expect it, and then it just goes hard.
Yeah. Dinosaur Jr. is there also. I don't know. I only know Weezer basically. So but excellent, cool. Check that out. Glad stuff is tourism coming to Wyndham. Also, Westkill Brewing is having a new beer revealing on March 25th. 3500 Club will be there, as well as the Catskill Mountain Search and Rescue Team. I will be there for the Catskill Mountain Search and Rescue Team. So come join us from like 12 to 6 on the 25th to talk about search and rescue and the Catskill 3500 Club and the new beer from Westkill Brewing. So yeah. Aleksandar, I know you're not familiar with the Catskill Mountains, but I do a little bit of Catskill Mountain history. You okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time there. I've been to the Adirondacks a little bit, not as much as I'd like to. But I mean, it seems like a really nice area, at least from when I've driven through it.
Yeah. So this I basically took from the book Heart of the Catskills by Bob Students about naming the peaks. So it's pretty cool. So I'm just going to read this off, Aleksandar, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Considering Arnold Gouliat's sober-mindedness regarding the name of the mountains, it is interesting to note, however, that many Catskill peaks Gouliat did name. In fairness, Gouliat, it must be mentioned that his action may be attributed to the fact, as Gouliat wrote in his 1880 scientific article, that most peaks measured were without names, and therefore he had to find some fitting appellations nonetheless. The list of new names and names changed is impressive. For example, in the northern Catskills, Gouliat named previously unnamed peaks for his assistants Samuel Rusk and Harry Kimball. Now, Mount Kimball was changed to Thomas Cole Mountain for, of course, the painter of Thomas Cole. Gouliat also named the peaks between Overlook and Hunter Mountains. These peaks from east to west, Gouliat called Platterkill, Indian Head, Schoharie Peaks, which is Twin Mountain today, Mink, which is Sugarloaf Mountain, and Stony Mountain, which is Plateau Mountain. Gouliat also renamed certain mountain peaks in the southern Catskills. He changed the name of Round Top, a common name in the Catskills, to Double Top, South Mountain to Graham Mountain, and Dry Brook Mountain to Haynes Mountain. The latter two mountains now named for early settlers in the region. It was even suggested that Gouliat he renamed Hunter Mountain, which is the second highest mountain in the Catskills, to Mount Gouliat, and Slide Mountain to Lionhead or Lincoln Mountain. But Gouliat declined that and complimented, saying in regard that Slide refused to employ what he called fanciful names. These examples, only a select few, suggested not only the scientific, but the imaginative contribution which Goyot's works has made to our knowledge and its understanding of the Catskills. Nonetheless, it is true, and as recent critics have indicated, that Goyot's map is not perfect. It contains errors, of course. Some mountains are misnamed or the names are transposed on its map. A few of the names are misspelled or vary in spellings, and of course, the elevations of the mountains have been found inexact by our more precise modern methods, of course. The 1903 USGS map and subsequent government topo maps make such evidence. Even some of the names which Goyot chose with such care were changed within a decade or two after the publication of his map. Goyot's Bluebell Mountain, for example, one of the more poetic Goyot names, has become today's North Dome. And what may be considered the most significant, in 1907, when the American Geological Survey was released, its new maps of the Catskills, with an accompanying scholarly article, although Goyot's friend and colleague Jean-Louis Agassiz was first encouraged Goyot to come to America, is mentioned, no reference can be found to the name of Arnold Henry Goyot, to his groundbreaking map that he created back in the 1880s. Crazy. Sorry to bore you, Alexander.
No. I mean, it's actually interesting because I don't know how you pronounce it. If it's Guyot or Guyot or whatever. Not good with that kind of French stuff. But there is a mountain in New Hampshire in the White Mountains actually called Mount Guyot as well. I think people pronounce it Guyot, but it's technically it's not its own mountain, so it's not prominent enough. But it's like 4,500 feet, I think, and it's not prominent enough to be its own peak. So it's not technically part of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers. But I remember hitting it. I think it's on the way when I was doing my last 4, when I was completing the 48 list. That's like one that you kind of hit along the way as you're going. So another New Hampshire connection there, I guess.
Yeah. Looking up right now, that is actually named after him.
Yeah. So that I figured probably was. That's cool.
Sweet. Yeah. He was all over the place. So he was, of course, as I said, the first creator of the map, like the Catskill Mountain maps and the names and stuff like that. So really cool piece of history. I love, for my listeners, love history. I love giving history of the Catskills and stuff because, the Catskills basically were the start of the American days. Everybody came here for recreation, and then they, of course, moved up to New Hampshire and the bigger places, the Adirondack, stuff like that. So, yeah, thank you, Alexander, for going through all that awesome chat. Though I had a great chat. I love beginning chatting and getting the flow of the podcast going. So basically, kind of like we know each other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Friendly. Yeah, that's what, like I was saying with the video thing. I mean, I'm so used to doing video chats now. It's like weird when it's just audio. I feel so indirect. I've done a few of those, and it's just like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. The person could be laying on their back in their bed or something, talking to you, but
it's hard to read. It's hard to read what they're thinking and saying, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And then that person could also be like, oh, I'm sick and tired of this. But right now I can see you're kind of into it.
No, it's all good.
Oh, good. So let's get on to the guest of the night for episode 67, Aleksandar Petakov.
Let's go.
We talk about his hiking experiences and mountain lions in the Northeast, one of my favorite topics. So let's hope this gets going a little bit. So Aleksandar, welcome to the show, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I'm very glad you joined. I contacted you and I was just like, this guy's really cool. He's done some really cool stuff, but I don't know if he's going to participate. But
yeah, I was curious how you had come across my stuff, and that's what I was wondering. How you had initially decided to reach out. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, the mountain lions in the Northeast is a big question of mine. I've always questioned about that, and of course, you did the documentary on that, so it sort of answers my questions, and hopefully, you can answer some of my questions as well. But so yeah, how about you give a little background about yourself, especially including your videography and your documentaries? Please include that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm kind of now, I call myself a cryptozoology researcher, and cryptozoology is sort of the study of hidden or undiscovered animals. So that includes stuff that people would probably be familiar with, Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, that sort of thing, but also creatures like mountain lions, mystery big cats that are in areas of the Northeast where they're technically supposed to be extinct, but people report seeing that by far. It's the most common type of report I've gotten from the Northeast. So that's what cryptozoology is. And I'm also a filmmaker, avid hiker, kind of outdoorsman. And I've kind of tried to combine those passions throughout the years and hopefully kind of bring people along for the journey in some of my films. And I've done a lot of different documentaries, a lot on Sasquatch, one on the Lake Champlain monster, kind of a lake monster, as you mentioned, mountain lions, and Bigfoot stuff is probably most commonly what I'm known for. I do a series for a company called Small Town Monsters that I'm a member of, and it's called Bigfoot Beyond the Trail. And the idea is we really try to get out there and investigate these Bigfoot stories from across the country and kind of go deeper than I think most researchers do, and most people will stay to campgrounds and that sort of thing. And we try to kind of push the envelope and just try to make it interesting and bring people along for the journey and show them some incredible nature and wildlife along the way if we can, and hopefully evidence of Bigfoot.
Nice. Now, you're not familiar with the Catskills, but you're aware of the Catskills. Have you ever been in here?
Yeah, I mean, I've just driven through there, going kind of from the Hudson Valley up into that area. As I mentioned, I've been in the Adirondacks a little bit, but not so much the Catskills specifically. So not too familiar with them. I know I've got some buddies who do some research in that area and kind of have a research group that's, I think, called the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective or something like that. And they kind of look into some of those stories. They've done stuff on some missing people, I think, in that area too. So I don't know a whole lot, but definitely, yeah, I can have you talk to some of those guys because they're pretty neat.
I like to hear that, like the missing person stuff. I've actually been looking for that for a while, and I get absolutely nothing. I get these stupid ghost things of like, come visit this ghost place for like $50 a night. Like, right. I don't want to hear that crap. I want to hear about real missing person stuff. So yeah, excellent. Hook me up if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me
know.
So
you've been all over the place. Like you hike in New Hampshire. Where else have you been?
Yeah, I mean, I've been all over the place. I was kind of mentioning earlier, I've done stuff down in the Smokies. I've hiked down there before when I was doing survival and naturalism training back when I was in high school. And then just all along the West Coast, Colorado, Utah, parts of Alaska, Washington, the Pacific Northwest. Gosh, where else? Just a lot of different locations down south. I mean, a lot of it has been through some of these documentaries we've done where we'll just go out and, like one of my favorite places I've ever hiked into was the High Uintas mountain range in Utah, which is nice. Kind of a offshoot of the Rockies there that's in the northeastern part of Utah, kind of in the corner there by Wyoming. And I mean, you've got these deep mountain valleys up there where you've got these alpine lakes that are above the 10,000 foot mark that are just some of the most incredible places you'll get to. We had hiked into one of those a couple summers ago and experienced some kind of strange activity, wood knocking and possible. I mean, I can only say possible Sasquatch. I can't say for certain, but there's history reports in that area. And I mean, you literally can only get in there by foot. So it's just a magnificent area. So that's one of these areas I've been to. Just a bunch of ones. I mean, and I've hiked in a lot of these areas or just kind of been into the woods in some of these spots. So yeah, in terms of hiking, most of my hiking has been in the New England area, as I mentioned, down south, other places, but primarily New Hampshire with the 4,000 footers that really got me in the White Mountains and to know that place a lot. So that's probably one of my favorite spots to kind of be and kind of my former stomping grounds, I guess.
Nice. Now you've been overseas, right? You said you've been across in the foreign areas, right?
Yeah. I've actually hiked a little bit in Switzerland too, nice. Just a tiny bit up to in Zermatt, which is where they have the oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the mountain there, which is really embarrassing because it's one of the most popular mountains in the world. The one that's on the Toblerone. No, it's the one that's on the Toblerone. It's like this very jagged peak. We hiked up to the base of it.
You got to be kidding me. I know what you're talking about.
Yes, this is really ticking me off that I can't think of what it's called. Gosh, it's in Zermatt.
Matterhorn?
Yes, the Matterhorn. That's yeah.
Okay.
See, it's like one of
Yeah.
those things that it's so obvious that you're gonna kick yourself for not knowing it. I definitely am. So I've been to there, done just a little bit of stuff in parts of the Balkans where my family's originally from, in Serbia, in Croatia, and those kinds of areas. But yeah, I've done some stuff in South Africa. Not, I wouldn't say necessarily hiking. We did a little safari down there. But yeah, just there's a lot of places I like to go just to hike to, which would be nice. A lot of places I've been to for other reasons, or if we're doing documentaries or something, there will be a hiking element, but that's maybe not like the sole reason we're there.
Mhm. Let's talk about your kind of your profession. What got you into documentaries and filmmaking and stuff?
Yeah, I was always just really interested in kind of that format of storytelling. I was in school kind of in the mid 2010s. I was in college and I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do and all this sort of stuff. And I really that was a time when stuff like YouTube and a lot of these social media platforms were kind of just taking off, and there was a lot of this really kind of guerrilla style filmmaking. And actually, a big
Yeah.
inspiration of mine is Les Stroud, Survivor Man. That's predates. I was like the 2000s, and he's actually done a lot of Bigfoot stuff now too. But that's besides the point. He really set the bar, I think, for the kind of DIY filmmaking. You're out in the bush and you're filming yourself and you're doing everything, and that kind of style is just awesome. So I'd always liked that, and I guess the time that I was coming through school was, like I said, when these platforms were getting bigger. And what it basically meant was that you could either, I studied communications, so I had a lot of people that were going to go into journalism or news media, a lot of people that want to go to LA or New York. Not a big city person. I was kind of like, yeah, I don't really want to do any of that. I'd rather be somewhere closer to nature. I mean, being in Connecticut was miserable enough with that, with that kind of, being from New Hampshire.
Nice.
So I was lucky, I guess, in a sense, that time period was when, independent filmmaking and really being your own kind of person was sort of coming into fruition. Traditionally with media type work, you had to be New York or LA or even, Vancouver or Atlanta or something like that. You were kind of limited, and there was some stuff, but it was all TV and cable TV movies. There wasn't really anything else. So when YouTube and all these other platforms started coming up, people were basically just becoming their own creators. So yeah, I took a while getting to the point where I am now, where I sort of am able to have fun and do this sort of stuff. But that was always a passion of mine, being able to kind of just tell these stories in a way that I wanted to. And that's when I really gravitated towards the cryptids, cryptozoology kind of topics, because I'd always been interested in that since I was a kid. And then I started getting out into the field and going out with researchers and talking to eyewitnesses in New England and other places. And I realized there's truly something going on here. I mean, you've got thousands of people across North America reporting very similar things with consistent behavior that's patterned in certain areas as opposed to others in areas that are conducive habitat. It's pretty compelling once you kind of look into it. And I know it's a tough sell maybe for a lot of people that you think Bigfoot is like a joke or something, but with the amount of space that I've seen out in parts of North America, I think there is a lot of habitat still out there. And nowadays, most people, when we go visit a national park, we stay on a trail. We don't go very far off. We're not in the deepest, darkest parts of that wilderness exploring. So yeah, to make to get back to my answer though, that's sort of some of the factors that came together that inspired me to just start doing films on my own. And like I said, YouTube and other platforms allow you to sort of do that. Obviously, you're still battling against kind of the big studios and that sort of thing, but
Yeah.
there's a lot more, like now with all the podcasts and everything that's out there, there's a lot more niche sort of markets out there and people who are interested in these things. So that's what's really cool. You're able to find those and connect those audiences and people that have stories to tell in ways that 20 years ago would have been pretty much impossible unless you had some kind of big studio connection or something. So it's been definitely awesome to kind of go that independent route. And I guess that's sort of a complicated answer, but that's sort of how it all started.
Dude, it makes sense. You want to break away from the corporations and, you want to take your own journey. You don't have to say, you have to do what they tell you to do. Like, you got to be, basically they're trying to tell you to be fake when you can be yourself.
That is it. Yeah. I mean, all these shows, unfortunately, the stuff I grew up on, I feel like was different. There was a time before reality TV. I think that really killed a lot of entertainment, especially TV and cable. It was like death sentence. I mean, you went from stuff like The Sopranos to Jersey Shore within a few years, which was
Ugh.
just like a drastic departure from quality to complete trash.
Yep.
Sorry to Jersey Shore fans out there,
No, no, no,
but
no.
reality TV became so cheap to produce that you had a lot of these companies looking at Bigfoot topics, saying, "Oh, we could just easily make find the weirdest Bigfoot people out there, put them in one room together, watch them fight," and that's how you get stuff like $10 million Bigfoot Bounty or whatever kind of cheesy shows they come up with that don't really have the truth at heart. That's not what they are trying. They're not trying to prove Bigfoot's real. They're not trying to find legitimate evidence or find eyewitnesses that can share their stories. They're basically just trying to make a buck, and they don't care who they trample along the way. So that reality TV infusion really kind of dampened the topic. And so the way I approach the cryptid topic specifically is the way I would like to see something presented, kind of in vein of some of the stuff I grew up watching, whether it be Monster Quest or In Search of, and this classic series of old that kind of took the topics a little more seriously than the reality TV stuff does. So that's sort of the way I try to approach it. And it's really nice because you don't have some corporate kind of person breathing down your neck telling you, hey, this is how you should portray this story, or put in a fake scream or whatever, put in a fake footprint, because that regularly happens even to this day with some of these programs that are kind of about Bigfoot and other topics that they just fake all that stuff. And it does a disservice, I think. I've talked to so many people over the years that are, for very professional backgrounds that have no reason to gain anything from ever being associated with a topic as crazy as Bigfoot. They would literally lose social standing because of what they encountered. Then they won't tell you until they trust you, and they've never told anyone else. I mean, who am I to tell them their story's BS? They clearly experienced something, whether or not it's real or not, they experienced something that they are scared to tell other people for fear of ridicule, especially in the light of these kind of cheesy programs. So I kind of figured, hey, this is how I would want to tell these stories and treat these witnesses with respect and just tell it as it is. I mean, not sugarcoat it or add any, pent up drama or anything like that. And that's, unfortunately, there's a lot of that as is. So that's kind of what we're up against, I guess.
Yeah. So what have you done documentaries? Can you name off the documentaries so I can
oh boy.
What do you, okay. So your top three.
There's a lot. Ooh, top three. I mean, that's a tough one. That's also a tough one. I will just say,
oh shit. That's good. That's good. That's good.
Because there's a lot I do like and a lot I don't. So, I mean, I started kind of around 2015 or so. I put out a really short documentary. I actually got to visit Loch Ness in Scotland, which was a kind of a lifelong obsession, and I really wanted to go over there. And I actually came out of that a little more skeptical of something like Nessie existing than previously, believe it or not. So I did a short film on that, and I don't recommend anyone go watch it, but it's out there on the internet somewhere. But after that, I started doing kind of a YouTube web series with Bigfoot interviews and people with encounters in different parts of the U.S. And then I did a series on the Lake Champlain monster. It's my first kind of foray with small town monsters. And that was all about the Lake Champlain mystery there up in upstate New York and Vermont. You've got this massive lake, and there's been centuries of weird reports, some kind of strange creature in the lake. Very compelling. I actually was more compelled by the Champ stories than the Nessie stuff. It's funny because Nessie's the most famous lake monster in the world, and I'm probably more skeptical of that now, whereas Champ, I grew up 3 hours from Lake Champlain and didn't even really think about it much. I was focused on the thing that was across the ocean there in the UK. So I did On the Trail of Champ. And then I worked a lot on some of the Small Town Monsters films. So Small Town Monsters, for folks that don't know, we're an independent production company that does just documentaries about all sorts of cryptid topics. So we've done stuff on, the Jersey Devil, for example, a lot of Bigfoot films, the Mothman of Point Pleasant, Lake Champlain monster. I mean, there's so many, I can't even name them off the top of my head. There's On the Trail of UFOs. So we've done some UFO kind of stuff. And then I've worked on some of those films either in them or as crew, but I've always gotten to do my own sort of stuff on the side. And probably most commonly now, actually I did the Lines of the East documentary as well, as we kind of talked about, but since about 2021, I've been doing a YouTube series called Bigfoot Beyond the Trail. And that's what I talked about just a little bit ago. And that's probably what I'm most well known for now. If I had to say top documentaries, I guess Lions of the East would be up there. I would put then I would probably, just in terms of like the way I think telling some of those stories, But and then I'd probably put some of the Bigfoot Beyond the Trail stuff. Like, for example, we have a series we just put out. I mean, it's part of Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, but it's a 2-part kind of documentary called the Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch, and it was and our part 1 of that has like 1.6 million views on YouTube.
Wow.
And it's not all about the views, but it's really nice to see your kind of work get rewarded in that way. And that's probably the most interesting case I've ever worked on. Basically, long story short, buddy of mine that I've come to now know, a former military, a very professional guy, 747 pilot, no joke, had bought this, so he's a very kind of upstanding citizen. He bought this rural property that's over an hour boat ride from the nearest town on coastal Alaska in these mountains. Absolutely the most breathtaking place you'll ever see in your life, for me, for sure. And you had this cabin, and they had all kinds of weird activity there for the past 4 years. I mean, witnessing football-sized rocks horizontally flying out of the woods, getting stuff thrown at the cabin, hearing noises, finding footprints, vocalizations, whistles, whoops,
Wow.
the kind of stuff that's typically reported Bigfoot. People seeing large hulking kind of shadow figure as one encounter that happened. Just a lot of really aggressive kind of stuff. So we went out there and did some filming, and we spent 9 days at this location where you're completely off the grid. I mean, you have to get basically have to stand on top of a boat to get sat phone connection. You're in these thick Alaskan rainforest, temperate rainforest environments. So
definitely.
That was a very rewarding series, and Alaska to me just has a special place in my heart. And the stories up there of Sasquatch-like creatures. I mean, it's a place where you go and you're like, it would make sense for something like this to exist there, because there's so little people and such rugged wilderness. It's unbelievable. I mean, for people that maybe haven't been, it's just Alaska is in a class of its own. So the Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch, that's a fun one. Just a lot of the investigations we've gotten to do are things that I've personally always wanted to look into. Even some of my local cases here in New Hampshire, where I've had stories with eyewitnesses and other sorts of things, and being able to document those and kind of tell them in that format is really fun. I mean, stuff that even prior to doing that sort of series, I just collect research on the side, and I've got up to 50 plus reports from New Hampshire alone of Sasquatch-like reports from across the state. And being able to kind of deep dive into some of those is a lot of fun. But so that's sort of the long story short of all those documentaries.
No, that's good. That's good. And, we're here to, of course, talk about the good old mountain lions in the Northeast. So, that's how I kind of found you is, I am a big skeptical of mountain lions in the Northeast. And, I watched your documentary and I thought it was actually very, very well done. I'm still a little skeptical. So I'm sorry if I kind of interrogate you on this stuff, but you know what? That's what this is for, maybe exposure to you and to maybe make me believe that there might be mountain lions here. So the mountain lions of the Northeast, that's a pretty good documentary. I got to admit, I watched it. It's pretty good. Like, you did a great job.
I appreciate that. And, I'm not here to convince you. I mean, I'm not convinced myself. I tend to be pretty skeptical of a lot of stories. And, as I've been talking about Bigfoot, there's probably a lot of people that are going to be skeptical. They hear that sort of stuff. And I encourage people to think for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research. And I've met a lot of people that are super skeptical of the mountain lion topic. I've met people who are so far on the other side that they'll believe anything's a mountain lion. And that, for me, is also a problem. So it's an interesting topic, and it really, I went down some rabbit holes with that project, and I worked on it from about 2018 or so, just about till early 2020, and I released it right when COVID came out. So that was kind of a sort of killed the momentum on it, as there were bigger, more important things going on. But
unfortunately,
what I found was I would go to a lot of these events in New England where there'd be paranormal sort of things or Bigfoot and that sort of thing, and I would gather reports, Sasquatch-like reports, but then I would also, one of the most common ones I would get would be stories of mountain lions. People saying, well, I don't know about Bigfoot, but hey, I've seen a mountain lion on my property in rural New Hampshire or wherever. And then there's a story from back in 2011. I remember being in Connecticut at the time in school and hearing a story, which I thought was unbelievable. It was like a crazy headline: mountain lion killed in urban Connecticut, hit by a car. And I was like, what the heck? That makes no sense at all. And then, doing research on it, there was this mountain lion supposedly that traveled all the way from South Dakota and was killed in basically southern Connecticut, like an hour outside of New York City, one of the most densely populated places anywhere in the US, which is totally wild. I mean,
Yeah.
and they did the genetic makeup of this animal. They believed was from the Black Hills of South Dakota, where there's a known mountain lion population. Really kind of like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then it sparked up the whole conversation of, well, are mountain lions moving eastward? What's stopping them? Will we have these populations at some point? Some people even claim that there was probably pockets of mountain lions that had maybe survived some of the purges earlier on. I mean,
Yeah.
in most of the New England states, I found that most of the last official killed mountain lion per record keeping was like the 1860s to like maybe the 1890s. Around that time span, Maine apparently was the oddball out. The last mountain lion killed there was almost, I think, the late 1930s, which is like 50 years after some of like the one in Vermont, which I think was the 1860s. Crazy. I mean, that's just like wild. So that really kind of got me curious about this. And I started doing Lions of the East, just trying to talk to people. And I there were people who were kind of amateur mountain lion researchers. I talked to folks as well that had mountain lions. So there was a kind of a science center called the Squam Lake Science Center in Squam, New Hampshire, or it's Holderness, I believe. I'm not sure which town it is, but whatever. But they have a kind of a nature center there. And I remember going there as a kid and seeing mountain lions they had on display. And a lot of people think, well, hey, mountain lions are just live in the woods of New England. Not officially. They used to be. I mean, they used to be here, but they were pushed out by sheep herders and people with their cattle and all that kind of stuff, as they were seen like a threat. So as we talked about, like the wolf stuff too, very similar. They're seen as a pest. They were basically expelled from the area. These areas were heavily logged, so a lot of wildlife left anyway or perished, and they've started to return now 200 plus years later, where you have states like New Hampshire and Maine being the most heavily forested, Vermont, upstate New York. I mean, you've got millions of acres, connect that to Quebec, Canada.
Yeah.
There's tons of woods. That's why these areas support moose and bear and tons of white-tailed deer and all the other critters. So, I mean, the resources are here for these creatures to come back, but I mean, I also have a tough time believing there could be a breeding population. I would honestly not be surprised if there are male mountain lions that just wander and they come out here and they may be responsible for some of the sightings. Yeah, possibly. I mean, maybe not in large numbers, but I've also seen evidence that there were confirmed recently mountain lion DNA found in New Brunswick, Canada. So that's just north of us, which is pretty far north. So
it's the open tundra stuff, kind of, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was even confirmed footage of a mountain lion seen. Is it New Brunswick, right on the Maine border, literally a couple miles from the border with Maine, of a woman I talked to who had filmed the mountain lion walking through this prairie, basically. And the whatever agency there in Canada that administers that area had confirmed it was a mountain lion based on the size and the way it looked. So this is what I'll say. With this topic, I have a bunch of takeaways. So first of all, this takeaway I kind of just mentioned is I do believe there's possibly male mountain lions that are straggling into these areas. So
very few though, right? Very few, right?
I mean, yeah, possibly. Even a dozen would maybe be a push. But you take you take a dozen mountain lions and put them in an area the size of the Adirondacks. I mean, that's exceedingly rare.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of Florida panther research. That's another kind of thing I'm into because the Florida Panthers in a very unique position. I actually have a bunch of Florida Panther footprint casts I took last month when I was down there, or actually in January, looking for those things. But a very interesting story, because the Florida Panther is a mountain lion basically that's adapted to live in the southeastern United States, and they're now fairly limited in their range to about under 3 million acres of protected land in the Everglades National Park and Big Cypress Preserve, and that area that's kind of outside of Miami. They're there, and apparently they've documented a lot of the females don't really go that far. So the males are known to wander and meander when they've been collared with for telemetry, but the females will not go as far as the males. So the males are far more adventurous. So like that cat in Connecticut, it was clearly just moving along. It was kind of doing its thing, and all throughout the states it went. There was tons of food and resources. So there's nothing stopping mountain lions from coming out here. physically, that is. They have tons of resources. The whitetail deer populations would be more than plentiful.
Oh,
But
yeah.
having the females, that's sort of that would be the issue of a permanent population. I mean, could it happen? Absolutely. I don't see why it couldn't. I think a lot of biologists that actually look into this topic, they actually do agree that at some point, I mean, it's probably going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it'd be a great thing. I mean, people out west, California, Colorado, all these other states, they've learned to live with these animals, just like they do in Florida with the Florida Panthers. That, people in urban Naples are seeing these animals in their yards, eating their pet cats and that sort of thing. Maybe that's not exactly coexisting, but it's sort of that thing. But back to the takeaways. The other takeaway I had was that there is like this really weird conspiracy angle with some of these states. I don't know how to put it, but it just doesn't make any sense. I think it just comes down to, without getting into politics, government basically, not wanting to spend money and being very cautious about everything in terms of if it costs any more than that's what's allocated, they don't want to even look at it. Because I talk to so many people across the eastern US that say, oh yeah, the state knows they're here, they just don't want to deal with it, or oh, the state's covering it up. The state brought mountain lions in to help quell the whitetail deer population. You've probably heard that too. And a lot of that is just like,
several times.
Yeah, a lot of that is hearsay, kind of just sort of word of mouth sort of stuff that gets spread. It's like a bad telephone kind of thing. Not a lot, I don't put a lot of stock into it, but there genuinely does seem to be some sort of a weird, I think it's middle management issue with maybe some of these government agencies and like fish and game departments in different states and the public. And I think that breeds this distrust that exists, that it's not like some Illuminati-esque conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's the kind of like, we don't want to deal with this until we absolutely have to, because we don't, dealing with a mountain lion for a lot of these states in the East who are used to, let's say New Hampshire, dealing with moose, or they deal with bear. Mountain lions are different. They're an ambush predator, basically. They're not an omnivore like a bear. So it's a totally different type of response you would have to deal with something like a mountain lion than in the other native critters that are currently here. So it's a strange thing, but to just give a couple examples, there was every couple of years in New Hampshire, there'll be like in the news, there'll be a story about mountain lions, and it kind of drums up interest. And there's like a fierce debate. There's extreme skeptics on one side, extreme believers on the other. And it happened to be one of these cycles was going on while I was working on my mountain lions project in late 2018 or early 2019. And I happened to be interviewed by one of these journalists who was doing a piece on this. They talked to the people on all sides, and they talked to me. Oh, he's the guy, he's a documentarian doing a story on it. I didn't really have like a set camp I was in. I was just kind of like, I'm just covering both perspectives, whatever. And I'd done that interview, and it was like a print article, and it was online. And somebody reached out to me, a biologist actually, who said, long email, I'll never forget. And the end of it was basically explaining the circumstances of him discovering mountain lion scat on a mountain in New Hampshire that he knew was mountain lion scat, that he had worked with them out west, and he was doing a surveying project, or like an ecological study survey where, somebody wants to put in a housing development. They have to hire a biologist who then goes in and does multi-month or multi-year study. How would a development impact, like a muskrat population here, or whatever the case may be. So he's doing one of these, very accredited guy, and says, he finds this cliff up on this mountain that looks like a perfect cat perch, and puts his hand down as he's about to eat lunch into a pile of scat. And it happens to be very large. He said, looked way too big to be bobcat. So he collects that and some other samples, sends it out to a lab to get tested in Wyoming that's associated with their fish and game, or whatever their department is called, and gets, a couple months later, the results, it's a male mountain lion, Puma concolor. So we believe it is. He says, okay, that's interesting. And at the end of that email, he's explaining the whole circumstances. He says, basically, I don't want to say this is a conspiracy, but basically it's a conspiracy. He says that, once he notifies the New Hampshire Fish and Game about the discovery, that I found some possible mountain lion evidence. We may have a straggler in this area or whatever. And this was like the early 2000s, I should say. Apparently the New Hampshire Fish and Game's response is to contact this agency in Wyoming, basically have them revoke that result, saying, oh, actually, upon further examination, we cannot substantiate that result. So he said, okay, that's kind of weird. And I interviewed him for the film. You probably saw it. He was Rick Van de Poel. He was towards the end of the documentary. And the other case that's also in the documentary that's really kind of mystifies me to this day was in Massachusetts, where the lady with the horses, she lives in an area near a big reservoir where they have tons of wildlife and that sort of thing. Central Massachusetts, away from the Boston area, very kind of rural. And a few years ago, I think 2016, her horse was injured or attacked by something. They had found it all bloodied, and they assumed it was probably a bear or something like that. They didn't really understand. And then they called the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection or something like that, whatever. Every state, I got to say, when I'm saying whatever it's called, every state basically has like a different thing. New Hampshire, it's Fish and Game. Vermont, it's Fish and Wildlife, and they have game wardens. So it's all these different states. It's really hard to keep up with, actually. But Massachusetts has their DEP, I guess they call it. They send the guys out there, they examine the property, and they come back to the owners and basically tell them, hey, we think this horse was injured because of owner negligence instead of it being an attack. And they were, you said that you tell a horse person that, they're going to get pretty pissed off.
Yeah.
So they were basically determined to say, well, no, that's not the case. So essentially there was some kind of an altercation. There was the horse had like a gash on its side, and there was a broken latch of a fence that was found like 10 feet or so maybe from where it was originally. So they said, okay, the horse probably hit that, and that's how it got injured. Well, they went to that spot, and I visited the location, and in that fence post where that latch was ripped out, there were scratch marks in the side. And all along the bottom trail, or the bottom wood on the fence there was apparently a trail of blood at a very low angle, which would have been unusual for a horse, I suppose. And they only had the two horses, and they had found hair tufts that were actually embedded in some of that wood. It's like those double wood fences where they kind of stack them, and if you ran your hand on that, you'd get splinters like crazy.
Yeah.
And there was hair there with follicles. So they did their due diligence. They collected that and preserved it, both ripped off some of the wood samples with the blood and the hair samples, and sent them off to a lab in the University of Florida to get tested from a reputable lab that had done testing of animal attacks and that sort of stuff before. And they still had thought, it's going to be a bear. We just want to tell the state, this is, why would you accuse us of this? Essentially, they just seemed lazy. A couple months later, results come back, male mountain lion, and they were completely blown away. They then present that to the state of Massachusetts. The state says, hold on. We want to get this retested, but at the lab, we all mutually agree on.
Yeah, right.
So then they go to the University of Arizona, another very reputable lab. They get the same or similar samples tested, from the both hair follicles and blood, dried blood, and same result. And according to the woman and her husband, then at that point, after that result, they had crickets from the state of Massachusetts. There was not any response. And basically, she had stated her goal was to get that put on the confirmed mountain lion case. There was, I think, one or two other confirmed mountain lion incidents in Massachusetts from, I think, the late 90s. She wanted to get that updated on there just so people would know, hey, this did happen. But I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird story. That one really kind of was interesting to me. So,
yeah. Do you think this is also like the government takes this perspective because so many false accusations of mountain lions, I saw this print in there and, it was 4 days ago and then expanded because it melted and stuff.
Yeah. So
of course
I'm going to get to that. So
good.
have that. So my two takeaways so far are, the government kind of angle, the people claiming to see them all over the kind of place, that there's something kind of going on. And then another takeaway is that, and this is something I see a lot in the Bigfoot world, is that people will believe anything. People are extremely gullible. There's a lot of fakery out there, a lot of total garbage online. People play pranks on each other, that sort of thing. That's a big takeaway. And that goes to kind of social media and how it interacts with people and how they interact with it and how these viral hoaxes can take off. I think that's far more spanning than just topics like Bigfoot or mountain lions. But I kept seeing time and time again, and I'm a member of a lot of these Facebook groups where they claim they have good mountain lion evidence, and then it turns out to be like a bobcat or something that's so clearly a house cat, and it's like, how does anybody believe this to be a mountain lion? So it really muddies the waters. But for example, I had one case where a person I knew sent me a Facebook message. They said, "Wow, look at this! My friend got this photo in Maine on their trail camera of this mountain lion, and they sent me the picture, and I immediately knew that picture. That same picture has been floating for 5-6 years with other claimed hoaxes. It's originally from, I want to say, Oregon or Washington, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, because it was sort of like a rainy, gloomy kind of area, so it could really be anywhere. It's not like it was taken in Arizona where you couldn't claim that was New Hampshire. It was a forested area. It could pass as somewhere in the Northeast." And I saw that, and I told the person, I said, I know this photo, and I sent them a link with the original and the whole kind of an article about how it had been used in hoaxes. And they said, "Oh my God, I don't know why this person would tell me this." Like, they swore up and down that this was their photo. Human nature. I think it's
all for the likes.
Yeah, people are manipulating, and this person was clearly pulling their friend's leg, either intentionally or maliciously. I don't know. See this time and time again with the Bigfoot topic, and somebody that does think that there is something like a Sasquatch type creature out there in certain wilderness areas. And with the mountain lion topic, it muddies the waters, because there are legitimate cases where people who are extremely credible are seeing things that I do not think they are mistaken in seeing, and yet they are being, kind of associated with some of this fakery. And for example, this was a crazy coincidence, but I was at some event in New Hampshire back in 2019 while I was working on Lions of the East, and I had a booth there, and I was kind of talking about some of the stuff, and I had a little poster for my Mountains or Lions of the East, and I had a guy approach me and said, "Oh, hey, what's this about?" We get to talking. Turns out he is a police officer in Connecticut, and he saw a mountain lion cross the road a number of years ago, back in 2011. Turns out he saw it a few days before that mountain lion was killed, confirmed case, in Milford, Connecticut, or wherever. It was like a small road, the highway where this mountain lion was hit. So he saw it a few miles from there a couple days before that. Nobody believed him. And this is a police officer. I mean, somebody who's supposed to be a trained observer, saw it in broad daylight, cross the road, the black tip on the tail. He's in the documentary as well. I literally had to interview him on my iPhone. Yeah, I remember that. I had to interview him on my iPhone because I wasn't prepared for that kind of thing, because it was like a crazy kind of coincidence. But he said all my squad buddies were like, "No, what you saw was a bobcat or something else." And then a few miles away, a few days later, this thing was killed. I mean, that's probably high probability that's the same one he saw. I mean, go figure, right? So
yeah,
that's interesting, right? And there are other people who have had very credible sightings, and like I said, I don't doubt there's a habitat. So there's a lot of takeaways, and I think, does it create like a clear yes or no answer if someone were to ask me, "Do you believe there are mountain lions in the Northeast?" No, I'd have to give a long drawn out answer, because there's so many nuances. Like, the possibility is there, yes. Breeding populations, that's highly debatable, and not very likely in my view. And when you mention the point about the government conspiracy in terms of, because of the hoaxes, is that why they're so cautious? I talked to game wardens in Vermont. I interviewed the fur bearer biologist for New Hampshire. He's actually been seen on the show Northwoods Law. I've seen him on there a couple times. Nice. They've had like a moose that's gotten stuck somewhere. Kind of funny. But I talked to people that were formerly in the Massachusetts kind of environmental kind of movement and that sort of thing. People in Connecticut and Rhode Island as well. And that did definitely seem to be the case, where a lot of these people, like the guy I interviewed from New Hampshire or the game warden in Vermont, he said, I want to believe people, but we've looked into some of these stories and they turn out to be hoaxes, a lot of them. So they don't even look into a lot of them. And, they'll have an official report you can file out, but there's not a lot they can do, right? I mean, unless they have irrefutable proof, it's kind of treated like Bigfoot. There's not really, they can't just have a sweeping statement from a government agency saying, yes, they're here. That's going to affect people maybe in their mentality, tourism, whatever. There's different kind of topics that maybe it would affect, but that's definitely part of the caution, I think. I think a lot of it also is just, as I mentioned, just the money aspect. It's just, I don't know. Government tends to not want to deal with something unless it's too late. I mean, there was a similar sort of thing on Cape Cod with the resurgence of the great white sharks there. It basically took, some sort of accident and actually shark attack that was fatal a few years ago to actually get some kind of federal and local really response to that was more substantive. A lot of locals are really pissed. I went down there after one of those fatal attacks, and great white sharks, another area I'm really interested in. But yeah, so that's it's just an interesting topic. I know I could go on and on, but
Yeah.
not all sightings are credible.
Yep.
Not all the evidence is credible, but of the stuff that is out there and some of the stuff I showed in the film, I think is extremely compelling. When you're talking about DNA evidence from multiple labs that are basically world renowned, it's hard to really dispute that sort of thing. So it's a convoluted, complicated topic, and I think people should be skeptical. But I've had, like, one of my buddies growing up. He said he grew up in Vermont. A friend of mine from high school, known him for a long time. And he was like, "Yeah, I saw a mountain lion while hunting with my dad when I was a kid." I mean, he'd have no reason to just make this story up, right? And he said I'd assumed they were just there the whole time. Like, nobody really thought anything differently. So yeah, it's interesting. So it's kind of a topic that you can really go down a lot of paths. And then you have the whole Black Panther thing, and that's kind of another really weird element to it. And I don't know what to make of it. We can get into that too if you want.
Yeah. Well, no, the funny thing is, I'm on, like you said, on all these Facebook groups. You see these rural Facebook groups, and they're just like, "Oh my God, what is this? It's a mountain lion." And of course it's a bobcat. It doesn't have the tail. It doesn't have the length. It's small. Same thing with the prints. A lot of prints, over time will melt and then look like they're huge, look like, way bigger than your hand.
Big factor for sure.
Yeah. The one thing that gets me is all the trail cams out there, and there's very little evidence. But like you said, the Adirondack Park alone is 2 million acres.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Up north, let's go from the Shenandoahs all the way up to Maine. 12, like you said, 12 mountain lions in that area is very, very rare. I mean, thousands and thousands of trail cameras, and we can't say there's one credible photo of a mountain lion. And then, just, I think it was a couple weeks ago, my friend sends me a picture. It's like, "Dude, my friend caught this on Bel Air. Check out this picture." All I got to do is a simple Google search of mountain lions, snow, deer,
right?
And all of a sudden it pops up, and it was, I think it was out in Idaho or something like that.
Yeah, so somewhere out west, right?
Yeah, and I'm just like, come on, you can't bullshit me.
It is interesting. I mean, with the Connecticut line, I know there was, I don't think there were any trail camera photos of it in Connecticut, but I think there was one photo taken, in that general area not a few days, but around, before it died, where you could kind of see like a blur, and you could tell it was basically somebody saw it walking through their yard and was like, "Oh man," tried to get a picture as quick as they could, and it was basically gone. I mean, it's really hard to tell in the photo, right? It's just like a blurry blob. I mean, that happens so often with wildlife. They don't work on our timetable in terms of being able to get a good photo, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. Yeah. But it is interesting, that example. And as you mentioned, just some of these areas, like up in these remote parts of New Hampshire or Maine, the Adirondacks, wherever, Vermont, there's just all abundant deer population. They wouldn't even necessarily need to come into towns or anything. I mean, why it shows to go into like an area like Connecticut. But you do bring up a good point with the trail cameras. For example, in Florida, with the Florida Panthers, they get a lot of trail camera photos because of that habitat is so small. I mean, it is a large area, don't get me wrong, but highly recommend you checking out, if you're interested in this, the Florida Panther Tracker. So if you go to the Florida Wildlife Commission website, they have a panther tracker where you can look at people's sightings of photos and tracks they found. Sweet. And take a look at the urban versus the rural area. So you'll see like Naples just plastered with red dots of sightings, people seeing them in their yard, people's cats being killed by them. And then you go to like the Big Cypress Preserve, where it's like 800,000 acres or whatever it is of just nothing. And there's like 2 roads that connect to it. You'll see very few sightings, and the sightings are all along the roads. And you'll see a couple of those track photos in there are actually mine. I've submitted multiple years in a row finding Florida Panther tracks down there. I've submitted photos and had them go in. So basically, let's say you come across a panther track or you see one in Florida, you take a photo of it or whatever, and you can submit it on the Florida Wildlife Tracker or the Panther Tracker website on the FWC. And then a biologist or somebody will look at that. And eventually, if they think it's just a bobcat, that won't go public. But if it is, if they deem it to be, yes, it is a panther, it goes up
Sweet.
On the website. So that's a really cool resource, and that is an interesting topic just because of how unique of a situation is with the Florida panther. There's a really, really good looking documentary coming out now called, I think, Path of the Panther. I cannot recommend enough watching the trailer. I have yet to see the film, but it's the story of basically trying to preserve the wildlife corridors that exist in Florida. So Florida is a state, very unique position. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting wildlife that lives down there. I mean, the only place where you have alligators and crocodiles in the same place on Earth. You have the Florida panther, you have black bear, so many different unique species. They have a lot of invasive species issues, but they have, like, basically, you see an area like Miami, it's all built up, millions of people living in the same place. You drive an hour east, you're in the middle of nowhere, protected woodlands with the Everglades and all that sort of stuff. As Florida's population's expanding, these wetlands are being more and more encroached on, and some of it is protected, but they're basically trying to protect the corridors that connect some of these wild areas, because one of the number one causes of death for Florida panthers is being hit on the highway when they're crossing in between wild areas. So they've started doing these underpasses, which are like wildlife corridors that are basically blocked off. They just allow the wildlife to move from one big tract of woods to another. The documentary looks stunning. So I definitely recommend, I think, Path of the Panther, something like that.
Nice.
Go into National Geographic on YouTube and search that. That'll come up. But I'm working on a documentary as well about the Florida panther from being down there in January, just to kind of, hey, this is what it's like going out looking for the Florida panther.
Yeah.
And we're going to kind of push a little bit in the angle of, hey, this is a really unique species that deserves to be preserved. And those habitats in Florida, I mean, what's so interesting down there in Florida is that you have people from basically all political persuasions that are like, this is our public land. This is a place that needs to be preserved. You've got like hardcore, fifth generation ranchers who live out in these swamps, and they want to protect this area just as much as your, kind of stereotypical tree hugger kind of folks. So you got people that probably vote extremely differently, kind of all agreeing to the same thing, that they need to preserve this, because if the population keeps ballooning, these habitats are going to shrink. The Florida panther will go. All the other species that enjoy those environments that are already quite threatened are going to be even more threatened. So it's a very unique story within like the whole mountain lion kind of story, I guess, across North America.
Yeah, the East Coast mountain lion. I previously went over something back in the 1800s, of course, with a mountain lion being in like our area, where some guy wrote up a story about how he shot 3 of them that tried to invade his area in the Beaver Valley, which is, right around the corner from the Catskills, one of the most remote areas, one of the most areas that, the Native Americans were in. And, he was out there for 3-4 days, and he said he had to kill 3 or 4 of them. That's back in 1850s, maybe, with a shotgun. So, am I convinced that they're up here? Not yet, but am I on the edge? Maybe. Like you said, when I was down in Utah and I went through a slot canyon and I saw a big, huge mountain lion print, I took a picture of it, and I'm like, what else is there? Are there bobcats in Utah? What else could have a feline print out there?
Right.
It's more mountain lions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
okay.
I'll have to give you a picture of some of these tracks we got them, and we got down in Florida, possibly even a juvenile walking with the mother, because we thought maybe this track in the mud was a bobcat, but it was basically paralleling the larger track, which is clearly a panther. Which, I mean, the panthers down there are just a little bit smaller than, say, they would get in like Utah or Colorado or any of these places out west, just because it's a regional adaptation. Just like the deer down there are smaller than they are up in our neck of the woods, the bears are a little bit smaller. It's Bergman's rule, where essentially the further north you go, animals get a little bit larger, and the closer to the equator they get smaller. So that's why moose in Alaska are gigantic, even compared to the ones I get, here in New Hampshire. So, it's just so interesting going to those areas out west and having to deal with that potential threat of the mountain lion. I mean, attacks are exceedingly rare across North America. Moose are the most dangerous animal in North America, believe it or not, per attack numbers.
Crazy.
Even more than grizzly bears or black bears. But
that's crazy.
When I'm in areas like in Colorado or Utah or even Washington State, anywhere along Northern California. I mean, we've been in places where we found evidence of mountain lions. There were like one area in the Olympic Peninsula. We were there with a group called the Olympic Project to do a lot of Bigfoot research out in that area. And it's like this insane mountain range right on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, kind of on the other side of Seattle. On the eastern side of Seattle, you have the Cascade Mountains, which are rugged and incredible. And then on that peninsula west of there, you've got the Olympic Mountains, which are just kind of jut out. And you have these temperate rainforests, like the Hoh Rainforest. Unbelievable environments. I mean, in my opinion, is one of the prime places something like a Sasquatch could exist as well. And there's been reports there for centuries. You've got rich Native American folklore. But we were out there hiking in this area on a trail, and every like few hundred feet, we'd find this little scuff marks in the dirt and a pile of little dirt kind of built up. And we're like, okay, we are on the trail of a cat. They just, at the time, they weren't sure if it was a bobcat or a mountain lion. Because they had been getting a bunch of mountain lions on their trail cameras. And we come into this old logging road in the mud, and there's this perfect mountain lion tom print, big, right there in the dirt. And we ended up casting it. And it was just really cool knowing you're kind of on the heels of an animal like that. So yeah, it's been I just respect them as animals. They're majestic looking. I mean, you can appreciate that. Would I wanted to have a hostile run-in with one? Absolutely not. I mean, who would? You hear these stories of like the jogger in Colorado.
Yeah.
It ambushed him, and it was a juvenile. So he basically choked it to death. It was small enough that he could do that. Or the one in Utah where the guy was jogging through the mountains and the mother attacked him. And those kinds of attacks seem to be, at least from what I am aware of, it's either a juvenile that's inexperienced and doesn't know what they're doing, and they're like, let me try this shit and see what happens.
Yeah.
Or it's like a mother defending the kittens, and that's pretty much any species, though, bear, alligator, they're going to get really aggressive around their young, moose, whatever the case may be. I mean, I remember in Colorado one time hiking through an area with my buddy, and we just see these two brown things moving across the creek, and we realized they were baby moose, like kind of the moose from that season that were born. And we're kind of shitting our pants, like, oh my God, where is mom? Because they weren't, I mean, they were maybe a couple hundred feet, but we're thinking, where is mom? I mean, all we had was like, I think my buddy had a 9mm on him. We didn't have like a 357 or anything. So we finally saw mom. She was far away. She was chill. But so you see an animal that, is with their young. That is definitely one of the more dangerous kind of situations you can be in. But yeah, in terms of mountain lion attacks, they're not that common. Again, not something to be taken lightly. Definitely keep your kind of head on a swivel. I even know some people who will wear like a mask on the back of their head.
Oh, wow.
Like parts of Oregon where there's like a ton of mountain lions, they'll put like a Halloween mask on the back of their head because it's like a cat deterrent. I know they do that in parts of India and other places for tigers, because they think the cat, if it sees, if you're looking at it, it's going to say, oh, they know I'm here, kind of thing. So,
yeah, it'll keep on the edge of you.
Yeah. So, but they're a supremely fascinating animal, whether it be, the known populations that we have out west, or the ghostly stories that we have here in the east, or even the Florida panther down in Florida. I mean, I'm usually used to talking about the Bigfoot topic, so it's really nice to kind of get talking about this again, because I'm really passionate about it, and I think they're awesome animals. And I got to see, when I was filming my film at that science center, the Squam Lake Center, they had 2 mountain lions that they had raised from orphans. I think the story was like a hunter in Montana had shot the mother by accident, was hunting and didn't realize it had the kittens. So then, they put them up for adoption. And this center, the Squam Lake Science Center, adopted these 2 mountain lions and raised them basically. And they both have since passed, but they had them for, 20 or so years, I want to say. And being able to see them up close. And I actually got to go off season and see the keeper feeding them. I mean, and I have cats, and it's like, they're like giant house cats. It was crazy.
Aww.
And I mean, obviously you shouldn't treat them like that, but don't think they're just going to start playing with you for fun. But I was standing 3 feet away from like a metal little kind of bar window where they would open up a slot and put like a dead mouse on a stick and basically feed it to the mountain lion. Mountain lion would come up, stick its paws right on the metal, and they put the stick up with the mouse. It would grab the mouse, and you would hear the purring. You could feel it from like 3 feet away. So if you have a cat sitting on your lap, you can feel it purring, and it's kind of doing its thing. The mountain lion, you could hear purring. I could feel it physically from like a few feet away, just how powerful it was, because it's obviously like a house cat on steroids. And from what I understand, mountain lions are pretty closely related to domestic house cats. They are in that they're actually one of the lesser cats, so they're not in the same group of felines as like tigers and lions and jaguars. Those are in a kind of well, maybe jaguars are more similar, but Asian and African cats are in a different sort of category compared to mountain lions. So, and I heard it do this little like a meow squeak kind of noise.
Oh,
That's cute, but hey, not if it's
yeah.
chomping on your leg or anything.
Yeah. So with all this research that you've done, what are your percentages of you being convinced and not convinced? Are you on 50-50, or is that something you don't want to share?
No, it's I don't know percentage wise. I'd say, I mean, are there mountain lions in New England? 100%. There have been. We know that's happened with the Connecticut cat. Is there one right here, right now? Maybe, maybe not. I really can't say. Will they be here at some point? Sure. It seems to. I don't see why not. There's nothing stopping them. Especially if you bring in, somebody that might release like a female, or you bring in the human equation, that could screw everything up. I mean, we bring invasive species all over the place. So in terms of percentage, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I could give a percentage, but I am convinced that they could be here. I don't see why not. But do I believe there are stable breeding populations? Not at the moment. I don't really see much evidence that points to that. Granted, females do have a much smaller range than the males, but it would be a stretch to say that.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, like I said, I am unconvinced, but if someone's going to bring me some awesome evidence, you brought in your Lions of the East, brought me some decent evidence. But once again, someone saying like, I got a paw print right here is unreliable. But if someone brings me reliable evidence, hell yeah, that, I'm on your edge, basically. Are they
Right.
here? Are they here? Probably. But, I
not
want
in
to
large enough numbers to really have an impact. And then you take that whole human equation in, and I mean, that happens in the Bigfoot world too. You have to, like, even if a bunch of sightings are not credible because people are terrible observers, there's still that sliver though that is interesting. So it's just like I said, it's a complicated topic, and anyone please fact check me. I mean, feel free to do your own research. Don't take my word for it. Like I said, I want people to think for themselves, and I know people that are on both sides of the debate and in between, and I don't know. I don't really put myself into the debate. I guess I just sort of I present what I found. Those are my takeaways and my conclusions from being into that for quite a while, and obviously now I'm into the stuff like the Florida Panther and other areas as well. So it just kind of creates a whole kind of bigger picture, I guess.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm glad to have you on here as kind of like a person to show the evidence. And I'm glad you're doing this, because not a lot of people do this. Not a lot of people have a documentary on lions in the Northeast. So it's really cool to get you on here and, to talk about this subject, because it's very, say, sensitive. Is it sensitive subject?
I wouldn't say sensitive. I just say controversial.
Controversial. There we go.
Debated. Yeah. You've got people on both sides, and it's just nobody had really done it before. So I was like, I mean, I don't know why not. I mean, there is an interest clearly. I still get emails now and then. Most of what I get is Bigfoot stuff or other weird stories, but I will occasionally get an email or a message. I mean, I just got like recently, a couple weeks ago, that example I brought up of that DNA up in New Brunswick. That was somebody had sent me because they had also seen Lions of the East, and like, you might find this interesting. And if you can remind me, I will send you that link. They'd sent me like an article about it, and it was actually pretty interesting. This was like literally past couple weeks.
So yeah. So what about Alexander? Do you have any future plans, future documentaries in line?
Yeah. So I mean, most of the stuff I'm doing now is like Bigfoot topic related. But like I said, I am doing one on the Florida Panther. And it's basically kind of going to be just sort of a come along with us for an adventure to go look for Florida Panther evidence and kind of casting footprints that we found and just having a good time, as well as talking about the species and what I think the importance of them and, the reason to want to preserve them, and kind of just piggybacking on what other more important organizations are doing to promote sort of the conservation of that species and some of those wild areas in Florida, which I think is probably more important than the species itself is protecting the habitat that they live in. You protect that habitat, then that's where they will thrive. So that's sort of that movement down there. So yeah, those are mostly what I do. Is like I said, the Bigfoot stuff, YouTube for the Small Town Monsters channel. That's primarily what I focus on. But there'll be occasional stuff like the Florida Panther and maybe some other big cat thing if I do find something along the road that interests me.
Hell yeah. Well, good. I'm gonna put as many links as I can for your stuff in here. So I'm glad you can join me on this podcast. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you had a good time.
Yeah, it was awesome. Like I said, it was so cool to be able to talk about the mountain lion stuff in depth. A lot of times in podcasts I'm doing, it's mostly all going to be Bigfoot related. Maybe they'll ask me a little bit about the mountain lion thing, but we won't get to go in depth as we did with this. So I'm
nice.
I thank you for that.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about your hiking and stuff like that.
That too, I don't get to talk about a lot, so that is awesome.
Yeah, I'll have to recommend you to my friends of the New Hampshire. Sounds like a search and rescue podcast.
Oh,
awesome. They'll definitely have a good time. But so when you're up in New Hampshire, I know you haven't been down here in the Catskills. I have a thing called Post Hike Brews and Bites. My friend Mary Teacher suggested this. What do you suggest up in New Hampshire?
Oh, there's a lot of that's tough. So usually, I mean, I'm embarrassed to say, but a lot of times when we be getting off, some of these hikes, we would like go devour as much McDonald's or Subway as we could because we were like
fastest,
guys in our like mid to late 20s, so we were just like whatever. But there's some good places. There's if you're more towards like the Lincoln area, there's Black Bear Burger Co. That's a good one.
Nice.
Or it's like it's Black Bear something. I think Black Bear Burgers and Brews, something like that. They have beer and good burgers and stuff like that. The lines will be pretty long if it's like summer weekend or kind of in the summertime, especially because of tourist season. There's the Common Man, which is actually kind of a chain in New Hampshire, but they have a lot of really good stuff. I mean, you can find them in a lot of places. There's one in Lincoln as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then a place that I go to that's way far off from the mountains, but I would go there a lot sometimes after hikes because I was living in southern New Hampshire. So it'd take me, an hour and a half or 2.5 hours, depending on which part of the Whites I was coming from. Was my favorite barbecue joint in Nashville, New Hampshire, called Willie Jewell's Barbecue. If you're into that kind of thing, they're just awesome. It's like really good southern style. It's a small chain from like the Carolinas and Georgia. And for whatever reason, they opened a branch up in New Hampshire. So it's totally random. But those are just a couple places I recommend. And definitely in Lincoln. I mean, there's other stuff towards like North Conway side of stuff. There's, There's I can't remember the name. There's this brewing company. They got good beers and good food, but I haven't gone to that side as much because usually we're coming out towards Lincoln. But there's a lot of good little stuff in Lincoln, North Conway, that whole kind of area. But yeah, those are just a couple post hike places I'd check out.
Nice. Yeah, I'll tag them in this. I'll put them in here for a recommendation. So once again, thank you, Aleksandar, for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. I had a great time talking about mountain lions and other stuff like that too, and hiking.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah. Thank you to Outdoor Chronicles Photography, also Trailbound Project for your support to the show, and also Camp Catskill. Thank you guys for your support. Thank you to everyone who has donated the coffees, anything, monthly supporters. Also, thank you everyone who's listening. I can't believe, people are still listening to this shit. So once again, sorry to throw you off, Aleksandar. You're like, oh, God, I wasted my time here.
No, you're totally fine.
But Aleksandar, thank you for joining me on the show. I hope you have a good night.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Hey guys, I just want to thank you for listening to the show. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe and throw down a smooth review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any podcast platform that you use. You can also check daily updates of the podcast, hikes, hiking memes, and local news on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the official website of the show. Remember this, you just keep on living, man. Livin.
Wicked, 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 wicked.